ACC conference is the conference that I'll be doing. Start off with the bad. I got the Duke Blue Devils going 2-10. Not a good season from the Blue Devils. They are returning a good amount of key starters. But this is one of those typical basketball schools. I think they're starting to return back to basketball school form. So I'm going 2-10 this year. They just don't have a lot of favorable home games. They got teams like Florida State and Pittsburgh, Miami at home in their conference. They got to go on the road to some of the easier opponents like Virginia, Wake Forest. Easiest games on the schedule: NC Central, Army West Point, and two of the games that they play in the preseason are against Northwestern and Baylor. So those are tough games. Defensively, they are returning their top two tacklers. Joe Giles Harris, 107 tackles, 4 sacks, an interception. Ben Humphreys, second team All ACC last year, 106 tackles, 4.5 sacks. Two best players on defense: Alonzo Saxon, best player in the secondary. He's a senior this year. He had 53 tackles last year, a sack, interception. Mike Ramsey on the defensive line, and Byron Fields, who's a cornerback. Both had 30 tackles last year. Fields had two interceptions. That's most of the returning starters on defense. Only 5. Offensively, Daniel Jones is back. He's a pretty good quarterback. He's a sophomore. I think he'll continue to help his NFL prospect chances. In his sophomore season, he had 2,836 yards, 16 touchdowns, 9 interceptions last year. On the running the ball, Sean Williams is the running back. And, Daniel Jones is a pretty good runner, too. He had 683 yards last year, 7 touchdowns. Sean Williams, 642 yards, 4 touchdowns. Wide receiving-wise, they have their best receiver back, T.J. Ramin, 70 catches, 742 yards, and a touchdown. Jonathan Lloyd, 34 catches, 300 yards, 3 touchdowns. Chris Taylor, 29 catches, 315 yards, and a touchdown. So they're trying most of their, skill positions, and they are returning 3 offensive linemen. So this is something, though, that is kind of pretty common in the ACC this year. They're returning a lot of teams are returning a lot of starters on offense and defense. This team not as much on defense, so they are returning quite a bit of starters. There should be some pretty experienced teams in the ACC this year, but I don't think Duke's going to have that great of a year. Virginia, Bronco Mendenhall, I think they're going 3-9 this year. I have them just slated to beat Duke. They have Duke at home this year, so that's kind of where how I have them above Duke. Bronco Mendenhall, I think he'll eventually get this team, together. He's getting a lot of good prospects. He's got a couple of transfers. One on defense, Jack Powers, who's a senior from Arizona State. On offense, he's got a couple of offensive linemen that are transferred over, Colin McGovern from Notre Dame, and then also John Metellus from Notre Dame. Brandon Pirtle from Oklahoma State. He's a senior this year. He's slated to start at right tackle. They're returning 3 offensive. They're returning 2 offensive linemen, and then they have 2 of those ones from some pretty good colleges, and then the offense skill positions. Dion Dowling's back. He had 50 catches, 626 yards, 4 touchdowns. Alomita Zacchaeus, 51 catches, 584 yards, 7 touchdowns. Both of those receivers are back. Jordan Ellis only had 65 yards and a touchdown last year. He's slated to be the starting running back. I'm sure he'll share time with Jamari Peacock, Lamont Atkins, Daniel Ham, some of the other running backs that might get some time. And then Kurt Benner is back. He kind of took over last year, 2,552 yards, 21 touchdowns. um, 11 interceptions. He was all right. Watch out, though. Marvin Zanders, a grad transfer from Missouri, might compete for the job. Um, typical, 3-9 year. Don't think they're going to be too good. I think this team's, a couple years away from being where it wants to be. But I think once Bronco Mendenhall starts getting some more of his recruits in here, I think they'll be better. Defensively, Quinn Blanning's the best guy in the secondary, 120 tackles, 2 interceptions last year, real good free safety. Another good NFL prospect, Micah Kaiser, 134 tackles, 6.5 sacks, an interception. That's their middle linebacker. Chris Peak, 53 tackles, 2 sacks, another one of their linebackers. Anthony Brown, 38 tackles, 6 sacks on the defensive line. He's a DN. Eli Handback, 36 tackles and a sack. Jordan Mack, a sophomore, he had 40 tackles last year, a sack and a half. Juan Thornhill in the secondary had 45 tackles, 3 picks. He'll probably have a pretty good year this year. Bryce Hall had 2 picks and 25 tackles, another guy in their secondary. Like I said, this team's a couple years away from being where they need to be. Next team I got slated is North Carolina. I have North Carolina kind of having more of a down year. I got them going 5-7. Winning the games they should win, and then I kind of have them losing some games that I think that they'll lose. Kind of where North Carolina, Pittsburgh, and Georgia Tech end up is how they play against those teams. They have to play at Pittsburgh, they have to play at Georgia Tech. So I don't like that for them at NC State. They get Virginia at home, which is good. Notre Dame at home, which will be tough. Duke at home, they should win. Louisville at home, I think, is a loss. California, the first game of the season, I think they can win that one. Brandon Harris, I think Brandon Harris will honestly be pretty good. Transfer from LSU at quarterback. He is competing with Chaz Surratt, Logan Bird, some other Nathan Elliott, some other quarterbacks. But I think he's at a point now where he sat and watched last year. Lost his starting job to that guy that really wasn't even that great, Dan Etling. And the job at LSU really wasn't that hard. They run the ball a whole lot. So and I think he's gonna kind of let it all out this year. I think he'll honestly have a pretty good year. If he does get to start. But yeah, I still think they're going to go 5-7. Austin Proehl is back at receiver. He had 43 catches, 597 yards, 3 touchdowns. That's their best receiver coming back. Thomas Jackson, 17 catches, 186 yards, 4 touchdowns. He is I don't see him. Okay, he's a wide receiver. But yeah, kind of not bringing a whole lot of people back. The last 2 years kind of were the years for North Carolina. 1 year they did capitalize and did get to the ACC title game, but last year, they kind of came back down to earth. And I think they'll kind of continue to come back down to earth. This is one of those basketball schools. They're not returning. The running back that they had 55 yards and a touchdown last year, so a little bit inexperienced there. Offensive line-wise, returning 3 starters, not bad. Transfer from Florida, which is good. Tommy Hatton, another good starting offensive lineman, or another, I don't know if he's starting, but another good lineman. Defensively, Cole Holcomb, a senior, 115 tackles last year. Andre Smith, another linebacker, 113 tackles. Donnie Miles was their strong safety. He had 102 tackles. They're returning their top 3 tacklers. MJ Stewart, a cornerback, 11 passes blocked, 66 tackles. Kason Collins, another one of their linebackers, 60 tackles last year. Malik Carney at the defense end, 43 tackles, 5.5 sacks. Jermaine Clark, who had 42 tackles and 2 sacks. Returning a good amount of starters on defense, 7. And like I said, I don't think they'll win the games against Pitt and Georgia Tech on the road. So then I got Georgia Tech slated next, 7-5. They're usually pretty good. It's usually pretty tough to stop their option game. I'm pretty high on teams that run the option just because it's such like a different thing that you have to prepare for. You either destroy it and you make that team look terrible and you make the option look like garbage, or you get slaughtered by it and it looks like the best offense in the world. And there's a reason why there's a couple of teams that still run it. It works for them. It's one of those two when you're a team that doesn't get a lot of highly touted prospects. You can turn athletes. Athletes that don't necessarily make it at quarterback, or you can turn them into running backs and stuff like that. And that's kind of what they've done. They a lot of times the running backs in these option games now, and sometimes even the quarterbacks are probably played a different position, and they're real athletic though. So some of the guys returning on offense, I have them going 7-5. I do have them losing the first game of the year against Tennessee, losing to Pittsburgh at home, beating North Carolina at home, beating Wake Forest at home, winning at Virginia. I got them slated to win when Virginia Tech comes to Atlanta, and then I got them winning at Duke. I do have them losing against Georgia though. Offensively, Derek Mills is their best returning player coming back. 781 yards, 12 touchdowns. Another good running back, Clinton Lynch, 421 yards, 2 touchdowns. Quan Searchy, 317 yards, 2 touchdowns. Matthew Jordan, 265 yards, 6 touchdowns. And then J.J. Green, another guy that kind of came on later in the year, and he had 158 yards, 1 touchdown, not a whole lot running-wise. And receiving-wise, Clinton Lynch was their best receiver, 16 catches, 491 yards, 6 touchdowns. Ricky June, 25 catches, 425 yards, or 427 yards, 1 touchdown. Their best returning wide receiver coming back. 3 offensive linemen are returning. That's good news for a running team like this. They're not going to throw the ball a whole lot. And then defensively, if the main thing is that if they've got a good defense, then they'll be good. If they don't, then it's really hard, for their offense to, that's how I've noticed. When Georgia Tech has a good defense, then, they play a lot better. So that they'll have to have a good defense this year. Are returning 8 starters on defense, 8 starters on offense. The 8 starters on defense, Arnie St. Amour, 16 tackles, but he had 4 sacks. Chris Sergi Henderson, another guy on the defensive line, he had 26 tackles and 1 sack. Antonio Simmons, another guy on the defensive line, had 32 tackles and a sack. Keyshawn Freeman, senior on the defensive line, 39 tackles last year. And at the linebacker position, Lawrence Austin, 47 tackles. Brant Mitchell, 71 tackles, 2 picks. Lawrence Austin also had 3 interceptions. Lawrence Austin is actually more of a nickelback. And then Lance Austin, a cornerback, 50 tackles, 3 interceptions, 12 passes blocked. A.J. Gray, free safety, 72 tackles last year. Corey Griffin's their top tackler coming back, 82 tackles, 2 interceptions. So they do have a good amount of people coming back on the defensive side of the ball. So, that does bode well for them, but I still have them going 7-5. Next team is Pittsburgh. I like Pittsburgh with the additions of Max Brown, after losing Nathan Peterman in the offseason. But they do play a pretty tough schedule. After the first week of the season, they play Youngstown State. That's not going to be a cakewalk, honestly. Bo Pinnell, they'll probably win the game, but it's not going to – it's a game you got to prepare for. They're a pretty good FCS team. It'll be, Brown's first game. They'll struggle, I'm sure, at times. But then, they walk in. They got to go to at Penn State, Oklahoma State at home. They lost to Oklahoma State by a touchdown last year. They actually beat Penn State by a field goal last year, but this is a different Penn State team. And then at Georgia Tech, and I think that's a big first game in the ACC at Georgia Tech. NC State at home, which won't be a cakewalk. And then, they got a couple of they have, before the NC State game, they got a couple. I guess at Syracuse isn't that much of a cakewalk, but it's a game I look for them to win. A game with Rice at home, I see them winning that. At Duke, Virginia at home, I see them winning those. And then they end the year with North Carolina at home, at Virginia Tech, and then Miami at home. I've got them losing the one at Virginia Tech and the one at Miami. I got them going 8-4, pretty good year. I think Max Brown will be a pretty good quarterback for them. Transfer from USC. I like their skill position position players. Quandre Henderson, I think he can be the next Tyreek Hill in the NFL. I think he's going to be a real good return man, real good at returns. He's their leading rusher coming back, 681 yards and 5 touchdowns, but he's actually a wide receiver, 26 catches, 286 yards and a touchdown. And then Jester Way had 36 catches, 870 yards, 10 touchdowns, more your traditional wide receiver, pretty good wide receiver. He's a senior this year. They actually have a real fullback in George Alston. He'll run the ball from time to time. He had 5 touchdowns last year and 22 catches, 5 touchdowns out of the I think he had 5 touchdowns catching too. And then Quadri Allison is their running back. I think Darren Hill will get some time too, but a good running back. He's a big boy. He only had 138 yards last year, but that was because he was behind John Connor. And then returning 3 offensive linemen. They also have a transfer from UCLA, Chris Clark at tight end. Watch him. And then defensively, they've got some good guys in the secondary. Jordan Whitehead, 65 tackles and a pick last year. Avant Maddox, 49 tackles, 8 passes blocked, and 3 interceptions. And then linebacker Luwazin Aduwu, 74 tackles last season. And then Quentin Riggies, he had 28 tackles and 4 sacks. Shalim Brightwell, 26 tackles, 2 sacks. So they are returning a good amount of guys. They got a transfer from Tennessee, Dwayne Hendricks. Watch him. Redshirt freshman Keyshawn Camp. Another guy, a guy that redshirted at Penn State, Kamont Carter. Slated to start a defensive tackle for them. Rory Blair, 22 tackles, 3.5 sacks on the defensive line. Watch him. And then I got Virginia Tech getting second in the ACC Coastal Conference. I like them to go 9-3. I have them winning against West Virginia, first game of the year. First loss of the they had 3 cakewalks at that point. Then I have them losing against Clemson at home, beating Boston College on the road, beating North Carolina at home, beating Duke at home, losing at Miami. I think just because it's at Miami makes it a little tougher for them. I think they lose that game. I have them slated to lose against Georgia Tech at Georgia Tech. Lost they won at Georgia Tech 2 years ago. But Georgia Tech is a team that they have struggled with a little, like in the past. I'd say they always have close games with them, so I think it's a game they could lose. I have them winning the game against Pittsburgh at home and then winning at Virginia. Got them going 9-3. Defensively, they're returning a lot of their starters, 7 starters. They have the Edmond brothers back, 106 tackles and 14 tackles for a loss, 4.5 sacks, a pick for Tremaine Edmond, and then Terrell Edmonds had 89 tackles, 4 picks. So these guys are monsters on the defensive side. Andrew Montupaku, 114 sacks, 3 interceptions, 2 sacks, 114 tackles, if I said that wrong. He's the middle linebacker. He's a real solid player too. Mook Reynolds, 64 tackles. I think he's kind of like a nickel type player. 2 interceptions, 2 sacks. Brandon Falson, 48 tackles, 11 passes blocked. Adonis Alexander, 7 passes blocked, 2 interceptions, 44 tackles. Falson had 48 tackles. Trevon Hill, 37 tackles, 2.5 sacks. Vinny Mihota, 43 tackles, 2.5 sacks. Both of those guys playing on the defensive line. Like I said, returning a good amount of starters on the defensive side of the ball. Greg Stroman, another guy, had 3 interceptions last year, 10 passes blocked, only 13 tackles though. This is a team defensively I like. I like their defensive coordinator too. Real good defensive coordinator. Bud Foster is the defensive coordinator. I couldn't think of his name for a minute. And then they got a kind of a quarterback issue. That's one of the big deals with this team this year. I think they'll figure it out. Joshua Jackson, redshirt freshman. And then they also have A.J. Bush. He played 2 years at Nebraska. Hendon Hooker and Jack Click and some other guys that, potentially could be the guy. Trevon McMillan's going to be the guy running back. He had 717 yards last year, 7 touchdowns. Also caught 3 touchdowns out of the backfield, 11 receptions, 114 yards. Best receiver coming back is Cam Phillips, 76 catches, 983 yards, 5 touchdowns. He'll be an all ACC type player, I think, this season. And then offensive line-wise, returning 3 guys on the offensive line. And then Joey Sly is a pretty good kicker, first-team All-American last year. So, the work's going to be on the offensive side of the ball. They have a transfer also at wide receiver, James Clark from Ohio State. Watch him. But, it's going to be the offensive side of the ball that's going to be the real issue. We'll see what happens. But I got them going 9-3. I think they'll have a pretty good year. They're usually always pretty they always have issues on the offensive side of the ball, and their special teams and their defense gets it done for them. I have Miami winning the Coastal Conference. I got 2 losses for them. I have the Notre Dame game that they have at home. I think they'll lose, and then I think they'll lose at Florida State. But other than that, I have them winning. Other than the Florida State game, I think their first 4 games are their other first 4 games are a cakewalk. Bye week. Georgia Tech at home, Syracuse at home, at North Carolina. I think they win all of those. Tough game against Virginia Tech at home. I think they win it. And then lose to Notre Dame, beat Virginia, and then win at Pittsburgh. Go 10-2. A lot of momentum going into the ACC championship game. Malik Rozier slotted as the guy to be the starting quarterback. He will have to compete with N'Kosi Perry, another good guy, and then Evan Sheriffs. Mark Walton is the running back, 1,179 yards, 14 touchdowns last year, 27 catches, 240 yards, and a touchdown. Real good running back here, real good prospect. And Ahmad Richards, real good wide receiver. He had 49 catches, 934 yards, and 3 touchdowns. He's one of their top receivers coming back. He is the top receiver coming back. Second-team All-ACC. Mark Walton was second-team All-ACC last year also. Some guys to watch out for, Lawrence Cage. Christopher Herndon is another guy returning at the tight end position. 28 catches, 334 yards, 2 touchdowns. Braxton Barrows, 12 catches, 178 yards, 2 touchdowns. Watch out for him to get a little bit of action this year. Offensive line-wise, we're turning 3 guys, or 4 guys actually. Couple of real highly touted guys. Michael Bagley, first-team All-American kicker last year. I think he'll be good. Defensively, it's Miami. If you're talking about Miami, Florida State, it's going to be all-out studs on the defensive side of the ball at most of the positions. Shaquille Quarterman is the leading tackler coming back, 84 tackles, 3.5 sacks. He plays the middle linebacker position. Michael Pinckney, 61 tackles, a pick last year, 2.5 sacks. Another one of their linebackers. R.J. McIntosh is a defensive tackle, 47 tackles, 2.5 sacks. Kendrick Norton on the defensive line, 39 tackles, 2 sacks. Jawan Johnson in the secondary, the strong safety, 38 tackles, a sack and a half. Chad Thomas, another guy. Where did he go? Chad Thomas. Where did Chad Thomas go? Oh, Chad Thomas on the defensive line. He had 37 tackles, 4.5 sacks. Real highly touted guy. He's a senior. Zach McLeod. Zach McLeod is a linebacker, 37 tackles. Joe Jackson. He had 8.5 sacks last year, 32 tackles. Watch out for him. Demetrius Jackson, 38 tackles, 2.5 sacks. Trey Harris, 25 tackles, 3 sacks. They've got a lot of good athletes on this team. I mean, like I said, that's just how it is with when you're talking about Miami. The state of Florida that just has lots and lots of prospects. And so that's what I have for the Coastal. So now let's go to the Atlantic. Syracuse. Well, let me start with. I've got Wake Forest getting last. It's a toss-up, honestly, between Wake Forest, Syracuse, and Boston College. I really feel like, basically whoever wins those games, against each other between Syracuse, Wake Forest, and Boston College will really determine, who gets last and stuff like that. But I think Wake Forest will go 4-8. A down year from last year. I don't know why. I'm not feeling the continuation of going up. Getting back to how they were. Big game, second week of the year at Boston College. Will define the season. I got it slated as a loss. Just being at Boston College, Florida State and Clemson back to back. I think are some losses coming off a bye week. I got them having 4 losses in a row. Losing at Syracuse, losing at Notre Dame, Louisville at home, at Georgia Tech. Got them losing at home to NC State and then beating Duke the last game of the season. So, I got them basically beating a bunch of cakewalk teams and then beating Duke, another team that I had, slated pretty bad. It's one of those things, like just the way the schedule falls. At Syracuse, at Boston College, they could be 6-6, pick up 2 more wins if those might be home games. They still might steal them, but we'll see. Defensively, Jesse Bates is their best tackler, coming back 100 tackles, 5 picks last year. He's their strong safety, second-team All-ACC, sophomore. Duke, a low 50 tackles, 10.5 sacks, a pick also. He's a defensive end. Real good player. He's a senior. Jabri Williams, 36 tackles last season. He's one of the linebackers. Grant Dawson and Cameron Glenn both had 35 tackles last year. Glenn is in the secondary, and Dawson is a linebacker. Offensively, they do a 2-quarterback system. Kendall Hinton is the runner. John Wolford is more of the thrower. Wolford had 1,774 yards, 9 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. Not great. He rushed for 735 yards and 6 touchdowns. Hinton was hurt most of the year. Hinton, 142 yards, 2 touchdowns, but Hinton is a better runner. I'd say, and they might both be dual threat QBs though. Matt Colbert and Cade Carney are both coming back at running back. Carney is a sophomore. He had 603 yards, 6 touchdowns. Colburn has 651 yards, 2 touchdowns. Tabari Hines, best receiver, coming back, 38 catches, 446 yards, 3 touchdowns. Cam Syringi is the tight end, 30 catches, 426 yards, 3 touchdowns. They're returning a bunch of other wide receivers. Cortez Lewis, Alex Bachman. Lewis had 32 catches, 415 yards, 7 touchdowns. So 3 offensive linemen are returning. Not bad. Mike Weaver, 21 of 27 last year. He's the field goal kicker. So they're all returning a lot of guys on offense, not as much on defense. We'll see how they do. I got them going 4-8. Boston College, I got at 5-7. I got them 5-7. And typical Boston College year. I think I guess a little down. They've been 7-6, 3 out of the last 5 seasons. They've had 2 pretty bad seasons, 2-10 and 3-9. I think this will be a 5-7 season this year. John Hillman's their best player on offense. He had 604 yards, 6 touchdowns last season. New quarterback in Darius Wade. We'll see how he does. Anthony Brown is another quarterback, but I think Wade will be the guy. Charlie Collinaire, Tommy Sweetney, Jeff Smith, Michael Walker are the returning wide receivers, returning all their wide receivers. Walker was the leader, 33 catches, 420 yards, 4 touchdowns. Jeff Smith, 27 catches, 395 yards, and 3 touchdowns were the top guys. Sweeney also had 26 catches, 353 yards, and 3 touchdowns. And then offensive line-wise, returning 4 guys on offense, which is good. I like that, with a running team. And I got them going 5-7. Losing to the teams that they should lose to, winning the games they should win. And defensively, they're returning their top tackler, Connor Strachan, 80 tackles, 3.5 sacks. Ty Schwab, 61 tackles and 1 sack. Harold Landry is their best NFL prospect. 4-team All-American last year. He had 16.5 tackles. He's a real good defensive talent. He'll be someone fun to watch. He had a pick also, 51 tackles. Will Harris in the secondary and Kareem Moore in the secondary, 47 tackles, 43 tackles, and both had 2 picks last season. Isaac Yodom had 10 passes blocked last season, 26 tackles. Wyatt Ray on the another linebacker, I think it is. Let me find him here. Come on, where are you? Ray had 4.5 sacks, 27 tackles last season. So they are returning some pretty good. Zach Allen had 36 tackles and 6 sacks also. I don't want to forget about him. And then Wyatt Ray's defensive end. So they are returning a good amount of guys, 8 on offense, 7 on defense. So, they might be a little bit better than 5-7, but, like I said, I got them winning most of the games they should win, losing the ones they should lose. Next team is Syracuse. Basically, Syracuse is 5-7 too. They would get a little bit ahead of Boston College because I have them slated to beat Boston College because they're playing Boston College at home, playing Wake Forest at home. So I got those as 2 wins for them. Losing the games they should lose, winning the games they should win for them. Defensively, they're returning 9 and 10 guys on both sides of the ball. That's a lot of people. Defensively, their top 6 tacklers are back. Paris Bennett and Zary Franklin, 2 of their top linebackers. 110 tackles, 101 tackles, and both had a pick. Franklin had 2 sacks also. Davion Ellis in the secondary, their free safety, 90 tackles and a pick. Rodney Williams was in the secondary also. He had 60 tackles and 2 picks. Jordan Thomas, a linebacker, 52 tackles, and then Cordell Hudson, 43 tackles. He was also, I think he was in the secondary also. Let me find him here. Okay, anyways, okay, yeah, okay, here he is. He's a cornerback. And then Chris Slayton, 33 tackles, 4 sacks, best player on the defensive line. But yeah, I mean, 10 returning starters, good amount of returning starters. Eric Dungy, pretty good quarterback. He's a pretty good gunslinger. He did throw 7 picks last year, 2,679 yards, 15 touchdowns. He did have some really good receivers last year. Erwin Phillips is returning, 90 catches, 822 yards, 6 touchdowns. Some good numbers. Stephen Ishmael, 48 catches, 559 yards, and a touchdown. And then the running back had 588 yards and 4 touchdowns, and then 21 catches, 132 yards through the air. So, returning a good skill position players, and then they're returning their entire offensive line, which I think is really good. That's something, like I've said in the past, it's pretty rare to see. So, maybe better than 5-7, but, it's Syracuse basketball school, so we'll see how they do. NC State has one of the most experienced teams in the whole nation this year. Lots of older players. If this is a year that NC State would make any noise, and I mean, obviously they're in a real tough Atlantic division, this would be the year that they would make some noise, I would say. I got them going 7-5. They went 7-6 last year, so that's 7-5 is nothing crazy. They haven't been any better than 8-5 in the last 5 years. The last time I remember NC State ever being really any good was when they had Phillip Rivers, Russell Wilson. They were all right when they had him, but nothing crazy. South Carolina, first game of the season. I think this is a game-defining season. If you win this one, I think it kind of sets you up with a better mindset. If you lose it, I think you kind of are like, ugh. So, and then if they can win that game, then they got at Florida State, tough game, but it set up a good game. If they could be undefeated, and then Syracuse at home, I think they can win that. Louisville at home, I think they'll lose that game. And then at Pittsburgh, I got them losing at Pittsburgh. Bye week, then at Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame will beat them this year after losing to them last year. Clemson at home, I think they lose that. They just got a tough schedule. It's kind of tough playing in the ACC nowadays. And then I got them winning against Boston College, at Boston College, at Wake Forest. Those are not given games, but I think they can win those games. And then North Carolina at home, I think they're a better team than North Carolina this year, and I think they'll win that game. So I got them going 7-5. Defensively, Gerard Fernandez, Arius Moore, top 2 tacklers coming back. 88 tackles from Fernandez and a pick, and then Moore, who is – where is Moore? Moore is another linebacker. He had 86 tackles, 11 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks. Sean Boone is the strong safety. He had 67 tackles last season. Bradley Chubb, real highly touted prospect. He was a 4-team All-American last year. 10 sacks, 11.5 tackles for a loss, and 58 tackles. Justice Jones, 3 sacks, 43 tackles on the year. Another guy on the defensive line. B.J. Hill, another guy on the defensive line, 39 tackles and a sack. And And then Kentavious Street, another guy on the defensive line, 30 tackles, 5.5 sacks. Darian Rosebro, 25 tackles, 7 sacks. This team's got a really strong defensive line. So I do like that. Some good linebackers, some good tackling linebackers. We'll see how their secondary holds up. And then, Jermaine Pratt is another guy to watch out for. He got some time last year, or he was injured. He got a redshirt injury last year. We'll see how he does. He's supposed to be a pretty good player. Offensively, 4 returning stars on the offensive side of the ball, which is good. I like that. Cole Cook is a returning tight end. We'll see if he can make some noise. The top player offensively on this team is Jalen Samuel. He runs the ball some. He runs the ball some. He catches the ball some. He had 55 catches, 565 yards, 7 touchdowns. Running the ball on 196 yards, 6 touchdowns. Slated as their running back is Naheem Hines. Real good prospect. He only had 61 yards rushing last year. He did have 43 catches, 525 yards catching the ball. They're losing their top running back. And then Stephen Lewis, 35 catches, 678 yards, and 2 touchdowns, was their top receiver last year. He's back. He'll be a good player. Ryan Finley transferred from Boise a couple years ago. He threw for 3,000 yards last year, 8 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Pretty good ratio. If you can keep the turnovers to a minimum, I think this can be a pretty good team this year. Look for them to kind of compete in the Florida State, the Louisville, the Notre Dame, the Clemson games. If they can compete in those games, they might be able to be a little bit better than 7-5. And some of those other games, that might be tougher in a normal year for NC State might be more of a cakewalk. But we'll just have to see how they play on the field. It's preseason. We hadn't really even got to see anything, so we really don't know nothing yet. Louisville. I like Louisville a lot this year. I like for them to kind of fly under the radar in a sense, kind of like they did last year. I know they're, only returning 4 returning stars on offense. They do have 7 on defense. It was never an issue what was how their defense was playing last year. It was always that they were just going to score more points than you, and I think that's kind of going to be how it is this year. They're going to have 2 games to kind of get ready for the season before the home game against Clemson, and I think they can get ready, and I think they can do it. But if there was one player that reminds me of the Johnny Manziel era more than anybody else since the Johnny Manziel era, it would have to be Lamar Jackson, in the sense that, not that they're not talented. Louisville's got real good talented players, but the fact that you're playing in a conference with Florida State and Clemson, and they have talented prospects everywhere on the field, and they're getting top talent every year. And Lamar Jackson is just one of those once in a decade type guys that will can defy the fact that your whole team is great. And I have them slated going 11-1 this year. Only loss is at Florida State. I got them beating Clemson at home. I think early in the season, Clemson coming off a game against Auburn. I actually have we'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, I have them winning against Clemson, and then winning at NC State. I think will be a tough game on a Thursday night, October 5th. That'll be a big game. September 16th is the day they play Clemson. At Florida State on October 21st, I think is a loss. I think that'll be a real tough game. I think they'll play them good, but I think it's a loss. I think Florida State will want some revenge for last year. Wake Forest, I got them winning at Wake Forest, winning against them. They kind of played cakewalk for the rest of the year. I think they'll, want to beat Kentucky this year after losing to them last year. Got them going 11-1, but losing to Florida State. The way the lineup, matched up Lamar Jackson, he's awesome. You knew he was going to win the Heisman for most of the year last year. I could see him being a repeat winner. That didn't happen very often, but I could see it happening. I could see him being really good again. He's just real unstoppable. The way he reads he reads the defensive end, and they did start to kind of in a sense start to contain him a little bit better towards the end of the season. But at the same time, there's a lot of injuries starting to stack up for Louisville. So it was hard for him. He was a little bit banged up, I think, at that point. So I think that's the biggest thing is if he can hold up this year. And then Jalen Smith is back. I think he's honestly their top receiver. He's statistically wise, he is too. Also, another wide receiver I like, one of their old quarterbacks, Reggie Bonifon. 13 catches, 159 yards, but 5 touchdowns last year. And then Jalen Smith, 21 catches, 599 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Both of them are good. Running back wise, they have Colin Wilson, a freshman, slated to start. But I see Jeremy Smith getting, good amount of time too. And obviously, Lamar Jackson rushed for 1,952 yards last year and 21 touchdowns. So he's going to be their top rusher. He also had 3,543 yards, 30 touchdowns, and 9 picks. So he's pretty good. I think this team will be pretty good this year. Offensive line wise, only returning 2 starters, which will be tough. One of the starters is real good, Jaron Christian. So then Clemson, I got Clemson going. I guess I should have done Louisville after I did Clemson, damn it. But okay, Clemson I got going 10-2. Got them losing 2 games this year, losing to Florida State, losing to Louisville. I have them winning against Auburn week 2. I don't think Auburn will have it figured out quite yet with the new quarterback and stuff like that. Clemson has a new quarterback too, but I think he's sat behind for a little bit longer. I think he's a little bit. I think he's ready. Kelly Bryant's the quarterback. I think he'll actually be pretty good. Give him some time to develop. I guess this is a game where both quarterbacks are developing, honestly. But then Tavin Fester, he's a real highly touted recruit. He's a sophomore this year. He had 234 yards, 2 touchdowns last year. Hunter Renfrow, Ray McLeod, Deion Kane, they're 3 receivers that are back. They weren't their top receivers last year, but some guys that have some experience. Ray McLeod, 49 catches, 472 yards, 2 touchdowns. Hunter Renfrow, 44 catches, 495 yards, 6 touchdowns. Deion Kane, 38 catches, 724 yards, 9 touchdowns. And then offensive line-wise, they're returning 4 of 5, which is real good. I think that's going to be the strong suit of the team, which will really help the quarterback out. And then defense they're going to be really good on defense again, just like they always are. Defensive line-wise, Christian Wilkins and Dexter Lawrence lead the way. Dexter Lawrence, 7 sacks last year, 78 tackles. And then Christian Wilkins, 56 tackles, 3.5 sacks, 10 passes blocked. And then Colin Farrell, he's a sophomore. He had 50 tackles last season and 6 sacks. Real strong defensive line. One of the best, I think probably the best defensive line in the country. And then Dorian O'Daniel is a good linebacker, 60 tackles, 2.5 sacks. Trey Lamar, another linebacker, 22 tackles. He didn't play a whole lot last year, but he's a pretty high-touted player. Kendall Joseph, 124 tackles last year, 3.5 sacks, 10 tackles for a loss, one of their linebackers, real good. Trevon Mullins and then Van Smith, 144 tackles, 2 picks last year, their best guy in the secondary. Trevon Mullins, he only had 15 tackles last year, but he's a returning sophomore. He was just a freshman last year, so he probably didn't get to play a whole lot. He's supposed to be pretty good. Albert Higgins, another guy on the defensive line that had 3 sacks last season. So pretty good. It's a real good team coming back. But I got them going 10-2. I just, they won last year, losing Deshaun Watson. I don't think they'll win again or, be right there again. Florida State, I think this is Florida State's year to win the Atlantic. I think they'll go 11-1 this year. They're going to lose to Alabama first game of the season, and then they'll get it together. Nobody really beats Alabama that first game of the year. Talent-wise, they have more talent. They're more ready than other teams. This is by far Alabama's toughest test in the first game. They've played teams like West Virginia, teams like Michigan in the past. On on the first game of the season that I can think of off the top of my head. Florida State's by far, I think, the toughest team that they've played early in the year. So, that'll be a good test. Then Florida State plays Miami week 3 at home. This is going to be a big game, but they're already going to play a tough game. They might have already have a loss on their schedule, so I think they're going to be ready. I see it as they'll win this game against Miami at home. NC State, I think they'll win against them at home. And then they play a couple cakewalks. Playing against Louisville at home, I think they'll win the game. And then at Clemson, I think it'll be a huge game. But I think, with Clemson, kind of getting the better of them the last 2 years, I think they're really going to want that game. It's going to be a big game for them. If they lose it, obviously, that's going to knock them out of title hope contention. I think they'll win it, and then they play at Florida this year. I think they definitely are the better team than Florida. They usually get the better of Florida. Since I've been watching, the last time Florida has really dominated Florida State was when they had Tebow, and Florida State has won 4 years in a row. So I think I look to them, to continue to win, and I think too is also Florida playing in the SEC. It's real tough for them to, it's another tough game after a lot of tough games. DeAndre Francois, he got knocked around last year. He got a offensive ACC Rookie of the Year, which he deserved after getting knocked around last year. He actually had a pretty good season, 3,350 yards, 20 touchdowns, 7 picks. He also ran for 526 yards, 5 touchdowns. Running back-wise, Jaquez Patrick is back, 364 yards, 4 touchdowns. They are losing Dalvin Cook. A freshman, though, Cameron Ayers, is going to be coming in. I think he's going to be a real stud. We'll see how he does. I think he'll get a majority of the playing time. And then Audie Tate is a guy that's coming back that I remember from last year, 25 catches, 409 yards, 6 touchdowns. Pretty good guy in the red zone. Nyquan Murray, another guy that at the wide receiver position, 27 catches, 441 yards, 5 touchdowns. He'll have some catches this year. Watch Devontae Phillips, another wide receiver they have. George Campbell. I think he was injured last year, he redshirted last year or something, but he didn't play last year. He's a sophomore this year. Offensive line, Ryan Izzo also tight end. He's a pretty good tight end. And then offensive line-wise, returning 3 guys on the offensive line. I think, that's not awesome, but that's pretty good. Ricky Aguayo, the kicker. And then defensive-wise, Trey Marshall, real good cornerback. He came in, played huge when Derwin Williams was out last year. Derwin Williams, he was a freshman last year. He was a starter. First of the year, tore his ACL. And he's back this year. I think he'll have a huge year. He was someone that I was really sad that he got hurt last year. I was really, kind of looking to watch how he would develop. Matthew Thomas is their leading tackler, coming back 77 tackles, 10 tackles for a loss. Trey Marshall had 58 tackles last year. Roderick Hoskin, another linebacker, 53 tackles, 2.5 sacks. Defensive line, Derek Nalden, 49 tackles, 6.5 sacks. 6 sacks. Jacob Puig on the defensive or the linebackers, 43 tackles, 4.5 sacks. Josh Sweat, defensive end, real highly touted defensive end. He's 41 tackles, 7 sacks. AJ Westbrook, a cornerback, he had 40 tackles last season. And then, they got prospects everywhere. DeMarcus Christmas, 2 sacks, 21 tackles. Brian Burns, a defensive end that was a freshman last year. He had 9.5 sacks, 24 tackles. I think this team's real poised to make a playoff. 11-1, I got them, winning the ACC, winning the Atlantic side, playing Miami in the ACC championship game, and I see them, handling Miami. Usually the winner of the Atlantic wins the ACC championship game. There's usually the Florida State and Clemson are usually the best teams in the Atlantic or in the ACC in general. So I look at them to win the game. And then, I see them probably making a playoff if they can go 12-1 on the year.